morning, all, and welcome to eSMB, what I am terming Education Day, because we're starting with our plenary and then have also mini symposia and our subgroup meeting today. So I hope you will be able to join us for all of it. This morning, I am pleased to introduce the education plenary speaker, Dr. Alicia Prieto Langrica. Dr. Prieto Langrica is a distinguished professor in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics at Youngstown State University. She received her PhD from the University of Texas at Arlington in 2012. Prieto Langrica's research is in the intersection of mathematics and biology, specifically agent-based modeling in the medical field. One of her undergraduate research students is a Biosigma Anderson Award winner for mathematical biology research presented at MathFest in 2016. She was also awarded with the 2019 Alder Award for Excellence in Teaching by an early career mathematician from the Mathematics Association of America. Dr. Prieto Langrica is co-director of Lathisms, an organization created to increase the visibility of Latinx and Hispanic mathematicians, a project which has personally inspired me and inspires many other Latinx mathematicians. So I'm very pleased to introduce her to the many folks joining us this morning, where she will talk about lessons from the pandemic, why and how mathematical biologist educators are morally obligated to respond. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you, Carrie, for that introduction. I feel like fancy. When you invited me to give this talk, I was like, really, me, little old me? But this is really cool, and I thought about things that I could talk about. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to start my slides. It's good, right? Everybody can see the slides? Okay, we're good. All right. So yeah, when you invited me, I was thinking about what I could talk about, and also like, welcome everybody, and thank you for being up so early, the people that are really, really early up. One of the things that I do a lot is I do a lot of undergraduate research. And I thought, well, I'm just gonna talk about that. That's the safe choice, right? Like undergraduate research is amazing. I think every undergraduate should do it. And I don't mean every undergraduate in math should do research in math. I mean, every undergraduate around campus should do research in math. And that's what I've done, right? Like I've done research with students that are psychology majors, that are business majors, that are biology majors. We all do research in groups in mathematics. And I think that that's really important, and it gives the students a sense of ownership of the research, and they learn a lot of things. So I thought we should do that. I also think that it's kind of the greatest equalizer, right? Like as a professor at a state institution, I get students that are at all different levels in their mathematical ability. However, when we do research in math, everybody starts from the same level. Like even me, even though they don't believe me, like even I start at the same level as them. Like I just recently started a project about the effects of screens on vision. I know nothing about that, but that's okay. I will learn with the students, and I think it's a really cool thing. However, this is a phrase that I really, really like. A crisis is a terrible thing to waste. I was thinking about that. I don't know if you know, but we're all in a crisis, right? Like this is a pandemic and things are really hard, and there's a lot of things that are changing. And there's two things that we can do. We can panic and try to do our best to do business as usual, or we can recognize things that have been going wrong for the longest time, that we haven't changed because our answer is always, oh, we've always done it this way, or this has always worked, even though it doesn't work for everybody. And then we can shake things up and do things different. So I'm gonna talk about that. So I'm not gonna talk about research. So bear with me, because I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of very incomplete, but I also thought, I mean, this is a room, not a room, but a virtual room full of people that are very smart, and maybe all together we can find better solutions for this problem. All right, so the phrase, many of you probably have heard the phrase, we teach math versus we teach people, right? I strongly believe that we teach people. And when all the pandemic started, back in February, March, I was like, we're gonna stay home for 1 month. At the beginning, people are not going to follow instructions, but as soon as people start dying, everybody's going to follow instructions. Nobody's going to leave their houses. We're going to get through this really fast. And I think I was wrong. And then I started hearing what people were thinking about this, about the pandemic. And I was like a little bit shocked. And my first reaction was, oh, they probably didn't go to college. They probably don't know anything about science. So here are some quotes that I picked from some of the people that some people that I know. And I don't want to make it about the people. I want to make it about in general, right? As general as possible. So I'm not identifying the people. So first they tell us maths are not useful. Now they're supposed to be necessary. They cannot even make their minds on something this simple. So why should we listen? This is somebody that went to college. Somebody that went to college some time ago. But somebody that went to college that doesn't understand that science evolves and that the evolution of science doesn't mean that the scientists would have it all wrong, right? We just learn new information and we put that information into what we already know, and things change, but that's just normal. Here's another one. This is a person that already was going to go to a friend's house, so if they going to be exposed, they might as well not wear a mask, stay as long as possible, and make the most out of the risk. So there's another maybe more subtle thing missing here, but is that the exposure, the probability of exposure is time dependent, right? Like it's not the same being with somebody 2 minutes as being with somebody 2 days. Like the probability that you will get exposed to the virus grows with time, and they don't. This person with 2 master's degrees does not realize that this is a thing. Then I was thinking, this is somebody in his 50s, the previous person was in his 40s. Maybe it's because they went to college so long ago that they don't remember. So I went and looked for students in college right now. Why 6 feet? That seems like such an arbitrary number. If it's dangerous, then why not 10 feet? Clearly, they're making all this stuff up. This is a computer science major. Junior, has been taking a lot of classes and a lot of math classes, and there's still not a sense of understanding that the 6 feet is not a number that somebody pulled out of their behind, right? Like this, it has a meaning and it has a reason for 6 feet. Another senior in a STEM major in his early 20s. Is it 6 feet or a mask? And if it's mask force, then why do we need to keep distance? This makes no sense. And this is the lack of understanding of this conditional probability, right? Like the more things that you do to prevent this transmission, the better. So why am I telling you this? You're all educators, but you mostly teach math, maybe biology. Well, my original idea that this will be over in a month maybe would have been true because 34% of Americans have a 4-year degree. 66% of Americans have some college classes. And anybody that goes to college, like virtually anybody, has to take at least one math class, right? So what are we doing in that math class that is not educating our students and giving them the tools and the knowledge to figure out how the science work and how are we doing these things? So I looked at the math class that people normally take. So here, what are we teaching? Most of us that are here in the audience, you teach math and you teach probably only STEM majors or only graduate level classes. Everything that I'm going to talk about here in this talk applies for all of these classes as well. But I want to focus on the Math for the Liberal Arts majors class because that is the class that almost everybody that is not going to take more math classes is going to take. So that's my contact, like my only way of indoctrinating, quote unquote, the students into realizing what math and science is, right? And that's also for the fundamentals of whatever science you teach, right? If you're a biologist, fundamentals of biology, fundamentals of chemistry. I'm not saying everybody here should like drop what they're doing and ask for this class, but I'm saying there's a way we could all get involved in the curriculum or in the way that we teach these classes, because it is equally as important what are we teaching in these classes, as well as how are we doing this teaching. And for the how, again, I think that applies to almost all of the other classes. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So I went around and I looked at what other universities and my university 5 years ago was doing for this math for the liberal art classes. And I pulled out 2 objectives just randomly. This first one talks about graphs, and it talks about what students are going to be learning about graphs. I think this is super cool. Like, don't get me wrong. I think that even though I'm not a pure mathematician, for the longest time I wanted to be a pure mathematician, and I love graphs and I love abstract complex, and I think it's important. When I push back on this with my own department 5 years ago, the response that I would get is like, I would ask, why are we teaching this to students? And they would say, because the understanding these concepts will help them think better and understand concepts outside and like on the real world, right? And then I looked at how the classes were being taught, and students are really not learning how to comprehend this concept. And here's another example. Students are learning how to cheat the system and pass the exam by copying somebody's step-by-step instructions, repeating them themselves, and then just pass the exam. They're not taking this and thinking, oh my God, I am going to be a politician. I'm going to figure out how to better do voting systems and how to elect people better and more equality-based voting system. They're not thinking about that. They're thinking about, how do I pass this exam? What is it that they're doing? Give me a problem that is very similar, change some of the numbers, and I can repeat it to you. And I don't think that we're doing a service to students if this is what we're teaching them. I think that we could do something different. So what if we flip the way that we design curriculum? So what if instead of thinking, what can I teach the students? I think, what are functioning adults going to need in their lives that math can help them solve? What kind of reasoning are they gonna need to be able to live a good, productive life? How can we introduce more complex concepts, but motivating them to meaningful applications that they actually care about? How can we empower them to be able to recognize and challenge things that are not true, while at the same time, because they're really good at challenging things, right? Like we've seen it all in social media. Everybody's challenging the experts, but at the same time, we need to empower them to accept what the experts are saying and to understand facts, if that makes sense. So while I was doing this, while I was thinking about all of this, I thought about what I could do in my own class. And as I've said before, like I've taught this class for the past 5 years, at least once every year, and I've been doing different things. So there. So do I have all the answers? And you all wake up really early and came to my talk, and I'm going to tell you I have no answers. No, I have some answers. So, but I don't have all the answers. I have a few things that I've been doing that I think have helped in many ways. When I teach this class, we talk a lot about what's happening in the media. I ask them to submit articles that they read from the newspaper, or like clips from the local news. I ask them to submit anything that's going on social media that has numbers or that has any statistics or something. We think about what the concepts are saying. We talk about them, and I make them write math. And this is hard for me, and it's an uncomfortable place because, first of all, I'm not a native speaker, so I mean, my writing and my reading are not the best, right? But these are students that are majoring in English, that are majoring in history, that are majoring in anthropology. They're really good at writing. So why not use those strengths that they have to like make them understand and process math, right? If I think about the type of students that I get in this class, I think about the students that are terribly scared of math, right? They're so anxious. The moment they see like big numbers, they just stop. When they're reading an article, and they all say this, right? We started reading this article, then there were some numbers, so I skipped them, and then I continued. And I mean, that's not what a functioning college graduate should be able to do. A functioning college graduate should be able to read the whole article, and if there's numbers, they should be able to check, or at least question if they make sense, right? Like they shouldn't be scared by something happening to 1,000 people in the US, because they should understand that that's such a small proportion of the people in the entire country, as opposed to like just thinking, oh, 1,000 looks like a really big number, I'm just going to stop right there, which is what they do. The exams that I gave are based on real life and actually their life applications. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about these points. But this is also a point that I want to make, and it's really important to me, especially right now after the pandemic. We are all, at least all my colleagues, were panicking a lot about exams because, like, how do I check if my students are not cheating, right? So I think there's a lot that we need to think about assessment and how we're making exams and what we're asking students to do. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I also want to empower the students to projects. So they might be really scared of the math, but they're passionate about something. So we do projects, and we do projects in which they have to do something that they're passionate about. And then they have to learn the math to do it, or use the math that we already discussed in class to figure out how to do the projects. The fourth one, I use math as a collaborative enterprise. I think that very few of us, and I don't think anybody in this audience can tell me that they do math by themselves, right? We all collaborate with people. And if we think about the jobs that any of our students that are coming in are going to be doing, very few of them are going to be working by themselves, right? The vast majority are going to have to work with people, and they're going to have to do teamwork and everything. And something that I always get a pushback from my colleagues is like, oh wait, my students don't like working with other people. Like, I can't force them. Well, of course we can force them. Like, they're not going to remember the math that we teach them, but if they learn how to work with other people, at least I taught them something that they can actually use later, right? I mean, I'm getting paid, and they're paying a lot. And that, the paying part, is like something that, as somebody that comes from a country where higher education is free, college education is free, like, the amount of money that they're giving me to teach them stuff, I feel very responsible for that. So I want to make sure that they learn something, even if all that they're learning is how to work with difficult people, then they learn something. So let's talk about these 4 things a little bit more in detail. I'm going to give some examples. We had in this class a chapter about exponentials, and in that chapter we were discussing things such as like mortgages and such as credit cards, and we even thought there was a couple of examples about the growth of bacteria, things like that. When I gave them the worksheet, I had asked them some particular questions in which they had to compute the normal things, just a few of them. But then I added this question, and I think this is the kind of thing that I want to talk about. How do you make those connections by not making them for them, but just asking them something so that they make the connections, right? So the question is, in the past few months, exponential graphs are all around us all the time. This is for my summer class that I just taught. You have probably heard the phrase exponential growth many more times than any of my previous classes. After reading this chapter, what is the one thing that you have learned or that now makes sense that was hard to understand about the pandemic before this chapter? They do these things in a team, but I asked them to submit individual answers for these, even though they all talked about them. So everybody submits their individual answer for what they learned. But they talked about it, and they come up with a cohesive thing as well. Okay, so the first student, I know that exponential growth means that whatever is growing will double in a certain amount of time. That's what they thought. I just don't think I ever realized how much this kind of math plays into our everyday lives before taking this class. In relationship to COVID, we hear how much the cases jump overnight, and it's crazy. But when you think about it mathematically, it makes sense. As long as it's growing exponentially, we will continue to see these numbers jumping. And it's even interesting the kind of like verbs that they use, like the numbers jumping. Like jumping means they go up and down. They're not really jumping, but these are the words that they use, and it's okay for it not to be perfect. I mean, it's not the last time we talk about this, but it's just, I'll show different answers that my students gave. So that was student number 1. Student number 2. In regards to the pandemic, after reading this chapter, it is easier to understand how the infection can be easily spread by one infected person to potentially hundreds of people by exposing, for example, only 3 people that they are in contact with. If those 3 people become infected, they can pass on the germs to 3 more people who each pass it to more people, and so on and so on. I never thought of calling this exponential growth. Each and every person who wears a mask is protecting themselves as well as many other people that they come in contact with, and those who come in contact with those people. The positive rates are affected by the number of unprotected contacts that occur. Man, if everybody in the US understood that, wouldn't we be almost done with this? Like, and we could go back to normal. And this is what the students said, like, right? Like they came and they told me after this chapter on exponentials, like they really were not somebody that was very worried about wearing masks or anything, because they said, like, I mean, it's not gonna affect me. And I know that they hear all the time that you can pass it to other people, but there's something about seeing the numbers, and there's something about seeing the graphs, and there's something about this thinking of 1 to 3 to 3 to 3 to 3 that makes them really get it. So I think that that's really cool that they, you know, that they have figured this thing out. Okay. So one more student, I have 2 more, promise. During the pandemic, there are many things that this class has benefited me. For example, we're constantly observing the data of COVID-19, and with that comes trend lines. Before this class, I never understood and thought of how that prediction was made. Now I'm fully aware and understand how the prediction is made, even though it may not be 100% accurate. Hopefully this will all be soon. Yes, hopefully. But this is really important, right? Students think that when they see those trend lines in the media, or like in the state or the governor state press conference, they're like, oh well, that didn't come through, so clearly they don't know what they're talking about, because they don't understand what is happening. They don't understand what a model is. They think that models are very precise predictions of what's going to happen, which we all know that that's not true, right? But when all that we have taught our students in a mathematics class is that you have a problem and you have a unique answer, then they have this tendency to thinking that we're perfect and that everything that we predict is going to come through exactly the way that we said it was going to be, because that's what we've been teaching them, if that makes sense. However, when we do examples like this and they realize this is just an approximation, this is just what could happen, this is just something like those cones for the, I always compare them to those cones for the hurricanes. So the hurricane is coming. You have this cone of like where the eye might possibly be located, right? So these trend lines are just exactly the same. And when they see that, then they think like, okay, so it didn't come exactly true as they said, so that doesn't mean that they don't know what they're talking about. This last one is really important. After reading this chapter and learning about exponential growth, I realized why the coronavirus pandemic has been blown completely out of proportion. I remember back in March when I was watching Governor DeWine and Amy Acton, I'm in Ohio, talk about down the road, they were predicting up to 10K positive cases per day. At that point, I thought that number was way out of reach. I now understand that they were basing their analysis on an exponential graph, which makes the prediction look worse than it is. I want to pause for a second because this student really surprised me. He was one of the smartest students in my class, but he has these preconceived ideas of what's true and what's not true, and who says the truth and who does not say the truth, right? And so when this happens, he just says, "Oh, I understand the model. The model makes sense. They're using the wrong model," and that's interesting, right? So I think it's not that we just have to show them models and we just have to show them how models work. We also have to make this connection, as they were predicting that if things work just like if everybody just lived their lives as if there was no virus, which we know that that's not the case, right? And we should make those connections that we have some agency on where the number of cases are going by what we are doing to prevent those cases from going up. I don't think he made that connection yet, but this was in the middle of the class, so there's some future growth, like there was a lot of future growth for this student by the end of the class. But this is interesting, and it's good that we talk about it, because if all that I have asked them were, when will this double in time? I asked them another question about if you get a house, would you get a 15-year or a 30-year loan? And what's the difference in the quantity that you pay? If I only ask them these questions, then there's numbers. But if I answer these open questions, then I get gems like this one, right? Harder to grade, especially if you have a lot of students. So I understand why people are hesitant to do that, but really, really powerful, I think. Okay, let's talk about some of the exams. And this is important, the exams are really important. Some of the things that I've done in the past, for this summer, for example, there's an issue that is hoping to make it to the ballot in Ohio about raising the minimum wage from $8 something to $13 in like 4 years. So I made them do this analysis in like how much would it raise per year, which is just a linear function, right? But they're super scared of this. So like they now and then they can recognize, and they even recognize, oh, this is a linear function. Yes, it is. We talked about what would be the impact in a small business, right? So this is a lot of the pushback always, like small businesses are going to suffer so much. So we talked about the number of small businesses in Ohio, what is the average of employees that they have. We talked about how much impact they would have. And not all the answers are the same, right? Like, because I give them several sources in which they can get the information, they get different answers, and that's also okay. And that they panic about this, but this is good. I also make them do this. This one was really cool. I thought about it. I was like, I should teach them how to make a budget. So I told them, you have a family of 4. There's 2 parents, both have minimum wage. Make a budget for your week, for your month, right? And this is also really cool because I get a lot of non-traditional students. And they are always like in the disadvantage because they haven't been doing math or schooling for a long time. But they got the budgeting thing down. Those 19-year-olds have no clue of what it takes to live by yourself, right? But the 50, 40, 50-year-olds, like they got this budgeting thing, and they understood how it wasn't sufficient for a lot of things. But the kids were like, oh, I'm gonna leave like ridiculous quantities for entertainment, and they never budgeted anything like daycare, gas for their cars, insurance, nothing like that. So these are exercises that make them think about things that they should be thinking, right? Like we should all be able to make a budget at some point, even with very little money. It's powerful to think about how you can live your life with like put all together your expenses. Yeah, I also like at some point told them, you're gonna win the lottery, and not a lot of the lottery, but like what would you do with your money and how would you invest it and why and things like that. And we talk about interest rates and savings and investing and other kinds of things. So just things that I think that they will use at some point. Also, it makes it really hard to cheat on these exams because, I mean, you can always cheat. Students are really good at that. But if everybody has different answers, it makes it really hard to cheat. Like when I say at life after graduation, I told them to pick up their dream job, and there were parts of a web page where they could find the median or the average earnings for that job, and they had to base all of their exam on those earnings. So like you cannot have 2 people with very different majors wanting the same dream job. So it makes it harder to cheat. This is my favorite part of the class. I give them projects that they have to do in teams. I only give them one question. What would you change about your community and how? And it's really open nature of the question, right? It's a lot like research. And I think that this is why I like it. Like, I like the fact that everybody learns a lot of things and they start from like the same, like just not knowing. They're hard problems. Like I'll give some examples, but they're not really easy problems to solve. But then they understand that the challenging problems, if you work on them, you can get them. They're semester-long projects. Oh my God, something that really, really gets me about the way that we teach math is that we ask students to give us things really fast. Give me that integral really fast. Give me that thing really fast. And that's so unrealistic. Like, even for students that are going to go into academia, like when have we had to solve integrals really fast? Or when have we had to do those things really fast? We do problems that take us years. And it is because of that when students go from majoring in math to going into grad school, that sometimes they don't have that practice of endurance, they're intimidated, and we lose some students because they do not, we haven't empowered them to do things that take a long time, and when they don't know the answer immediately, they think they're not good enough. And I know, you all know what populations I'm talking about, that we tend to think like we're not good enough. And as soon as we are faced with a problem that is too hard and we don't know the answer, we quit. Not because we're not, and not because we don't want to do the endurance, but because nobody told us that it's okay to have something that takes a long time, that it's okay to struggle with things. And this gives them that struggle. Also because they're real life problems, let's make them happen. So here are some examples of things that my students have done. About 4 years ago, yeah, maybe, a group decided that they wanted windmills on campus. They figured out the best place to put them. They figured out how much they would cost, where that money would come from, when would they pay for themselves and when would they have to start gaining electricity back to power the college, right? I brought the people from facilities and from energy, well, the people that are in charge of that, to their presentation, and they actually made it happen. So these students spent the rest 4 years, because this was they were all freshmen, the rest of the 4 years that they were in college, looking at the product of their actual project. And how cool is that, right? Like now they're not scared of math, because yes, it took some math to do that, but at the end they see what happened, they see the project, and that's the really cool part about research that I want to emulate and imitate in my classes, in all levels of classes. This powerful thing that it is, like, for students to see something that they made. Other things that they've done, some are really simple, like a group wanted to have a family room because they have kids and they don't have a place where they can bring their kids and just study. They figure out where the money was going to come from, what the room would have. They made surveys about how many people were going to need it, and like did a lot of like projections and things. And I invited the head of the library to their project presentation, and she was able to find them a place for the family room. And now we have a family room. Like, clearly it's closed right now, but hopefully after COVID it will open again, and then students can bring their kids and they can be keep studying and having their kids. So these are cool things. They get to see the product of their hard work, and that is really, really empowering. Okay, last thing. Almost everything that we do in this class, except for the exams, are in teams. So students get to, there's a long list of benefits, and they have been very well studied, so I'm not going to spend too much time saying things, but for these particular students, the less anxiety thing is really important, right? They have been convinced that they're really bad at math, so if they have a team of people that they can bounce ideas before putting them in page that sounds like such a big commitment, then they can work out on their anxiety and around it. There's also the benefit of teaching others. So if they understand something better, they can teach it to other people, and then they can learn it better. And again, this idea that most jobs require to work with others. So if all I'm going to teach them is how to work with hard people to work with, or how to work with difficult people, or how to not be a difficult person to work in a team, then I think I've taught them something. Something really cool and specific that happened, that it wasn't intended, is that it cultivates this empathy and fosters understanding among different populations. I live in an area that is, the city is majority minority population. However, all the suburbs are very white, and most of the people that come to school are very white, but then you have some of the people from the city. These are people that do not have a lot of access to people that don't look like them. So making them work in a group where all that they're discussing is mathematics helps them have this understanding of how other people live, the struggle that other people have, especially right now when everything has to be done online, and they get to see people at their own houses, or the realness of how hard things are, right? So that was very powerful this specific summer. I had students that just their vision of what other populations have to go through just expanded very greatly. So that was really cool. What else can we do in response to COVID? So this is the part that I wanted to talk to you all, because you are all super smart people and you can help me figure these things out. I think we should be questioning how we're doing what we're doing, right? And for example, for the longest time, we have all known that standardized tests are biased. In a bunch of studies, we all know that they disadvantage communities of color and then disadvantage other communities. But every time we challenge that, the answer is like, oh, we cannot do it. We've always done it this way. There's no other way of doing it. That's how it's done, and that's how it needs to be done. So some of the things that have been done in response to that is try to work with communities of color to make them better at standardized tests. I don't think that's a good solution. However, if you think about what's happening right now, during this spring semester, a bunch of people were not able to take standardized tests. So now universities have to say, well, how am I going to do admissions if I don't have this course? And they're forced to question that. So if instead of trying to figure out how do we do things the normal way during these not normal times, we start thinking, how do we make structural change of things that we already know are wrong and make them better? Because we have to do something different right now. We have no choice. We don't have scores from standardized tests. So what do we do? So I want to think about this stuff. I think that these are really important questions that we need to address. Assessment always gets me. Even engineers, like all engineers have to go through calculus, and we know that calculus is one of those gatekeeping classes that makes a lot of people go out of STEM because they cannot pass these classes. And what are the things that we ask them to do? Most of the time, and I'm not saying everybody here does that, but most of the time we all ask them to solve a bunch of different integrals or derivatives or chain rules or something like that in a very limited amount of time. You have 1 hour, you have to do all of these problems. And that is how we assess if you're going to be a good engineer. That's how we're going to assess if you're going to be a good engineer. When in your engineering life, you're an industrial engineer and you're just walking around your industry or your whatever, because I don't know what engineers do, but you're walking around this industry and somebody's going to stop you and be like, give me the solution to this integral by parts from 0 to 2. I mean, that's never going to happen, right? And yes, I know that there's a lot of value in learning how to integrate because it helps you reason and understand, and it helps you put things in order in your head, and it helps you do all of these things that happen. But is testing that way really what we want? Or can we think about other ways of testing and other ways of assessing if a student has learned something that are not so cutthroat? And I'm not saying don't ever ask students how to do an integral. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we need to think about different ways of doing things, because I think we owe it to our students if we're claiming that we're preparing them to be better engineers. I don't think that they really need to know how to do integrals really fast. Might be a little controversial, but I don't think so. The third one is accessibility. And this one has me thinking a lot because, again, I'm in a small state institution where students are not very well off. We have a lot of students that have food insecurity, housing insecurity, and we're asking them to now you have to figure out how to sit in front of a computer for 2 hours while I lecture you for 2 hours. Like, they don't have access to the internet. Some of them have to go drive and sit outside a library to borrow the Wi-Fi to be able to see the class. And how unfair is that? So we need to start thinking a lot about how are we making education accessible to everybody? Because we should, because it's our moral imperative. If we're saying that we are math educators and mathematical biology educators and science educators, we can not only wait until the students come to us and then give them more challenges to overcome, right? So I think these are the three things for what we teach and how we teach it. Admission, assessment, and accessibility. I think that we should be thinking about now that we have this awesome opportunity called COVID-19, in which things don't have to be the way that they have been done, because they can't. We might as well change them and change them for the good of everybody. So because I'm more interested in what you guys have to say than what I have to say, how about we leave it here and we talk about some questions or things that we can all talk about.
Great, thank you so much, Alicia. I have a few questions of both that have been put in the chat window as well as the Q&A. This is a general invite. If you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A, or if you just want to send them to the panelists and attendees, you can put them in the chat window. The first question that we received is, when bringing up real-world issues, how do you talk about them in a politically neutral way? There's a particular assumption there that you want to, but that you might want to address. But the example that comes with this question says, I can imagine with the minimum wage issue that some students may feel as if you're trying to convince them one way or another politically. So can you talk a little bit about maybe even generally, politics, balancing politics and some of this work?
So that part is hard, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I'm a brown professor, Mexican immigrant that comes to Trump country and tries to educate these kids. So I already, my existence is political, and it's very hard for me to get them to trust me that if they're gonna say something that I clearly do not think the same way, that I'm gonna respect their opinion. So I think first we have to understand that I have to put in the class that we're gonna be respectful of everybody's opinions because they're gonna be different, right? Like I tell students, I am so far to the left that Bernie Sanders looks like a conservative to me, right? So we cannot all be like that because this world would not work, right? Like we need opinions and differences of opinions, and what makes this country great is the difference of opinions and the diversity, right? So when they say, like in that example of the minimum wage, like I got students asking, like didn't budget anything for food and say these people can get food stamps, and I know where they're coming from. And then we can talk about why was the minimum wage actually established? Established, yes. And when you read that, it says it is what we believe that a family of 4 with 1 minimum wage should need to eat to live. And is that true or not? Like that is not political. Is it true or not? Like, are you like you? I gave you 2 minimum wages and you still couldn't make it happen. So what happens if I take 1 away from you? And then they can say like, yeah, that's not sufficient. So if it's not sufficient, what can we do? And I am a strong believer, like I don't want to take anybody's government assistance in any way, but wouldn't it be better that if people that are working don't need government assistance? And then we talked about these things. And yes, sometimes it gets controversial. And I do have students that are very opposed to my views, and they get offended. But we all need to talk about what is the validity and what is the data telling us, right? And I think it also has given me some street cred, that I have a lot of students that I get along super well with, that are super big supporters of the president and super big, different than what I think. Because we can be friends and have different opinions, if they're opinions, and we can actually talk about the data and talk about the math behind things. But math is political, and it is going to get political. And sometimes it's going to get a little bit, people are going to get a little bit upset. But that's also okay, right? Like the way that we have been doing things have been upsetting for a lot of populations that we have left behind. So if we are upsetting other populations, maybe we can all be upset, and that's a good thing.
Alicia, I see a lot of chatter in the chat saying great talk, thank you, amazing talk. But I've also seen a couple of questions asking for more resources. So if somebody is interested in adopting some of these teaching principles, are there some other resources that you can send them to? Anything you've written yourself, projects? Do you have some other examples, etc.?
I should. I've given talks before in education settings, and they always ask me, "Oh, where have you published that?" I'm like, "Should I? I should. I should publish these things, and I should like talk more about these things." I think that is a mistake my college did when they promoted me to full professor, so now I can do whatever I want. So I might be starting to write more of these things down and like raising these things like in actual paper. The MAA has a lot of good resources, and there's a lot of like chatter between like many of the things that I have for ideas to implement in my classroom are things that I've either talked to colleagues about, or that I've seen really on Twitter, or that I've like looked at. I go to other talks and I see, oh, I can do this and I can implement that. But my advice to anybody that wants to implement these kinds of things is don't implement something that doesn't seem like you. And that's kind of weird. Like if I had to do something super structured and super organized, in which every time I will be micromanaging people, that will work for some people, but it does not work for me. And it might have great advantages for the students, but it does not work for me. And because it doesn't work for me, I'm gonna do terrible at it. So know who you are and what kind of things you believe and what kind of things you're good at, and use your own strengths in the classroom to implement the new stuff. And you can always email me and I can give you hints, and like I can think about more about resources and stuff like that. And maybe I'm gonna put my email address in the chat.
As you're doing that, I'm sort of attempting to try to gather a few of the questions into common questions because there are so many. So one of the themes of the questions that I see is, can you talk a little bit about some contextual issues? For example, would this approach work at other international universities that have very, very different pedagogical systems? I mean, can you speak to that at all? Or in classes that are upper level, or math biology classes?
So I did half of my undergrad in Mexico, where the pedagogical approach is very different. And one of the classes that I remember things about was my ODE 2. We had like a second sequence of ordinary differential equations, in which the professor said at the beginning of the class, "You're all gonna ask me what this is useful for. I don't want to answer that question. So you figure it out, and at the end you do a project where you use what you learned, right?" So I've done that in my upper division classes, where like at the beginning I tell them, look at what we're doing, and at some point you're gonna come up with something that you can apply this to that you actually care about. And I remember really well that class, because that was the class where I found out that you can use ODEs to predict epidemics. And my project was actually on gonorrhea and on a model of gonorrhea. Like, I remember this really, really well, because I picked the project, because I picked what I was interested in. And because before that class, when I was in high school, I wanted to be a doctor, but I thought I would be a terrible one, because I'm really disorganized, and I could see myself like making surgery on somebody and leaving something there, or like not watch, like it would be a disaster for humanity. So in that class, I learned that I could still learn about medicine and medical problems and not kill anybody. So that was like super cool for me. So I think it's something that you can always implement on your higher level classes. If there's international populations, the international students, especially from some parts of the world, tend to like it more when you lecture at them, because that's what they're used to. But you can challenge that. And the thing that I would say about people born in other countries is, we're already very used to doing things different, because we come from a place that everything is done different, and then you come to another place where everything means something different and it's done different. So we are very adaptable. So they won't like, they might not like it at the beginning, but they will love it at the end. And I have some international students that have loved this way of teaching.
So just since you talked about, students who are new to this, and then students that really love it, what about sort of a little bit more broadly? So your department, how did you get your department on board with it? Other folks in your department, I'm thinking about teaching evaluations, et cetera. And then we have another question from Ray Mejia about professional society support and what they can do to help everybody sort of feel comfortable doing this more.
Okay. So for students buyout, I tend to treat my students as adults, and it's an interesting concept, right? But they assess me all the time. So I have maybe every other week, I ask some questions about them, like, what are you liking about this class? What can I do better? And I actually like put them all together. And the next time that I see them, I tell them, here's what you guys said. This because you said these things, I'm going to be doing these things different. And when I don't agree with certain things, like in my calculus class, they all say the same thing. I learn better if you tell me how to do things, and I see you looking at things, and I see you doing things. So I want you to lecture more. And I'm like, you want me to lecture more. So that next day, I do an example of the board, and I let them do another example. The very next lecture, I quiz them on both of those examples. And then I give them the statistics of how many people did well the one that I did, and how many people did well the one that they did, right? And when I lecture, I'm always like, do you understand this? Do you have questions? We do it all together. And it's outstanding how much the difference is between the one that they did and the one that I did for them. And once I present them with that evidence, they're like, oh yeah, it works. We're gonna do it by groups now. And I keep asking them, do you want me to lecture? Man, it's so much easier for me to lecture. But they always choose, no, let's do that, right? So I want them to understand. I want them to have agency in how they're learning as well. And I want them to understand that what I'm doing is not just because I'm lazy, right? Like a lot of students tell you that, like, no, you're lazy. And if you tell them there's a lot of studies that says that this is better, they might not listen to you. But if you show them and you treat them like they will make the good decisions, because they do want to pass a class and actually learn something. So And for my colleagues, I was very lucky that they always let me do whatever I wanted. Like my colleagues have been really great. When I wanted to do this change from what we used to do in Math for the Liberal Arts and then do this other thing, I was lucky that after a year, the state of Ohio wanted to change this into more mathematical literacy than what it was being done. So I had already done it. So I even got like a lot of support, and I got to talk to all the people that were teaching that class and with them do the curriculum design and everything.
Awesome. So just a couple of more questions I think we have time for. One of them is about teaching online specifically. So you talked a little bit about sort of reimagining assessment. Are there some other tips or things you've been thinking about or successes for teaching online specifically?
I think the one thing that keeps me up at night is how do I build a community that I build in classroom in an online setting? Because of the way that the school that I teach at, where students don't have the internet capabilities of having an online class, all my classes are asynchronously online, which is even harder to make them do community, right? But I've used stuff like this during the summer where we did this for the first time. I used a lot of the discussion boards on the Blackboard or whatever system that you guys use, and they all were able to like talk to each other and start finding each other. And at the beginning, they see me as the enemy, and so they gang up against me, and that's good because then they gang up, right? That's good. And then we talk about like, I'm not the enemy, I just want you to, you know. But that's really good. I have them do things in teams. So this first time, I only had three people that couldn't find a team it was a 12-week class, and by the 4th week, these 3 people have not found a team. So I told them, you're in a team together. And they actually became really good friends. This 3rd one dropped, but these 2 remained together and became really good friends. And at the end, made a super cool project about opening up a pool in an abandoned high school in their community because they live like very close to each other. So that was like really cool. So I think that there's a lot of things that we could be afraid of trying these approaches, but I tend to not be that smart, and I just jump in the water and figure out what happens once like we're there. So I think, did I answer the question?
I just want to go back to a couple of the sort of bigger picture policy questions. So again, to Ray's question about what could organizations like AAAS and AIBS do to support, because I think you've talked a lot about sort of inspiration of math Twitter, math Twitter. Yeah, I'm totally there with you. You know, of course, your involvement with MAA and Lathism. So what about some of the AAAS or AIBS? And then also, Lou Gross kind of has a similar question about, you know, there have been some work done, but what is different about working with this particular part of the puzzle, this math for liberal arts or early career mathematics?
Okay, so about resources, cubes. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Cubes.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have a thing, like it's QU and then consonants, so I never know how to pronounce it. But cubes is a really cool thing, and you guys have a lot of resources, and I know the MAA BioSigma has a lot of resources as well. I am not as involved as I should be on like bigger organizations as AAAS and other ones, but I'm sure like everybody has some. I'm sure that if we approach people and anybody that has an education a group or they would be much better at good pedagogy, right? Like I do things because they're convenient to me, and I think like they would be better for students. But I don't have all the answers, and I'm not a math education researcher. At least I'm trying to become one, but I'm not one yet, right? So I do not know all the research that has happened. So I'm a little. And what was Lou's question about?
About that there's been there has been a lot of professional society support trying to make more interactive and relevant math ed. And so, you know, but this is you're talking about math for liberal arts to an audience that's maybe thinking more about like the math biology and sort of encouraging involvement in that level of education. And so like what makes that classroom different? And I think you talked a little bit about this, like harnessing some of their already existing talents and interests that are more diverse and getting them to write. But is there anything else that's sort of different about this group?
So in the summer, I piloted this new idea that I learned from a physicist about having a part of the project. So they all get together and they do a project like in groups of 2 or 3. And then they have an individual component of the project that is an artistic representation of the project. So one group decided that they needed that our school needs a Black Lives Matter chapter, and that they need a space for Black students so that they can just work and do their schooling and everything. And they came up with that and did all of that. And then for the artistic representation, I had one of them write a song that they performed. I have one of them do poetry like about Black Lives Matter that just had me crying while I was reading it. And this is them putting more of themselves in the project, which I think it's really cool. And again, trying to use their strengths, which are more artistic than mine, to actually do these kinds of things. So yeah, I think, but I did use that example of math for the liberal arts because I think that if we all had done a better job during this time, then the 66% of the people that had taken a math class at some point would at least follow instructions and be better, and the pandemic would be a lot better than now, right? But all of these ways of teaching, the group projects, the working in teams, the actually getting them agency of what they're doing, that works for any level, right? We do research with students. Like, why can't we do similar things as research in our calculus class, in our numerical analysis class, in our modeling class, in all of these? And some of them, like math modeling or math biology, they're like really easy to do these things. Like, they should be project-based. They should be on their interest. And I shouldn't design a project for them. It should come from them so that they care about it and they actually have that power of like, they know more. Most of the time, they know a lot more about the project that way, right? If they're interested in it more than me. And that's really cool. I get to learn some stuff, which, yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm going to just thank you again, Alicia.
Thank you.
Get a roaring applause if you could hear it, I'm sure.
Thank you.
And I also want to take this opportunity to tell other folks that there's a great schedule of education activities to hopefully continue this conversation that we invite you to, starting with the mini symposia session, and then we have our ed group meeting at 10:35 in that same room. We did that in part because everybody can be part of a research subgroup as well as care about education. So, and then we have a virtual panel discussion on online teaching, hybrid and virtual teaching at noon. So we invite you to all of those events. In terms of some of the other conversations about resources, you can certainly email me to get added to the education email list. And then John asked to remind folks that the Bulletin for Math Biology is also releasing a special issue on education this year. So there's also plenty more resources and good things to read there as well. So thank you so much, Alicia, for starting us off today.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all for joining us here.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.